morning and welcome back to the current affair lectures that we have been doing. I would like to have some feedback from your side, and that is why I'm requesting you all to give or provide me the feedbacks in the comment section, which I very frequently check. Okay. So today we have taken very important topics from the last week. There has not been a lot of important events in the last week, but we have taken the topics that we can consider important from the point of view of UPSC, and here we are with those topics. Okay. Today mostly the topics are from polity. We do not have a topic from economy, I believe, and one is from science and technology, and I believe these topics are going to be fairly important because all these topics have already come at least twice or thrice in the exam. Okay. The first topic that we have at our hand is PESA Act. PESA Act means provisions extension of Panchayat to Scheduled Areas Act. It was enacted in 1996. Okay. This act is basically an extension of Panchayati rules, Panchayati Raj governance to the scheduled areas under the 5th schedule. Okay. Now we have two schedules that deal with the management and organization of life of tribal people, right? The first one is 5th schedule and the second one is 6th schedule. Now 5th schedule and 6th schedule, there is a very minute difference between both of them. The difference is that in the 6th schedule, there are specific states mentioned that we have to study, like AMTM, Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura and Mizoram. Okay. So these are the 4 states that have been mentioned in the 6th schedule, AMTM states. Because these states have huge amount of tribal population, basically northeastern states, they are northeastern states, and majority of the population there is tribal population with their own specific needs. That is why a special schedule was added into the constitution, that is the 6th schedule, which deals with the governance, the local governance and the district level governance in the whole these states. Okay, like these states have district councils or regional councils instead of like for example in Meghalaya there are 3 regional councils, Garo, Khasi and Jaintia regional councils, and these regional councils have their autonomous governance. Okay, I have dealt with the issue of 6th schedule at great length in one of my lectures. You can go back, you can search into the playlist and you will find it. I have gone into very great length and explained it in detail. Now, where does the 5th schedule areas come into being? Now, when these specific areas under the 6th schedule has been mentioned, from the areas which are majorly dominated by the tribal people, what about the governance of the tribal areas and scheduled tribes which reside in the other parts of the country? There are 10 states which have a certain fair degree of tribal population. So what should be how should they govern themselves, or what should be their governance model? What should be the provisions for their governance that has been provided in the 5th schedule, right? Now, Panchayati rules, this PESA Act was enacted in 1996. 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts came into being in 1992, right? And after these acts came into being, they provided the recognition to all these the existing panchayats and municipalities and local bodies, and sometimes people say that the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts provided for the establishment of Panchayati Raj. Actually, that is not the case. It was for the constitutional recognition of the existing panchayats or the local level bodies, and of course extension of these panchayats to compulsorily all the states. That was the main point, right? So why this has been in news? Because in the state of Gujarat, there is an upcoming assembly election, and some specific parties have been lobbying for the implementation of the PESA rules, basically. ठीक है? तो and for that the political parties are lobbying for it, and that is why it is in the news. And the second news that is more important is Chhattisgarh implements PESA rules. Sorry. Now, what are PESA rules? The point is, when Panchayati Raj and municipal governance was implemented in India, it was not de facto, or it was not automatically extended to the areas which are under the tribal occupation. Okay. It was said that these will not be Article 243M. The article, which article? Article 200, sorry. Article 243M. Article 243M talks about the exclusion of 73rd Amendment Act, basically Panchayati Raj, to certain specific areas, and the tribal areas, the areas dominated by tribal community people, is one of them. We'll be looking into that, okay, in a while. Now, but the clause was that although these areas have been excluded from the Panchayati Raj governance, but they can be included by a parliamentary law. Okay, they can be included. That means the provisions of Panchayati Raj Act can, or Panchayati Raj, the provisions of Panchayati Raj that are mentioned in the Constitution under the 73rd Amendment Act can be extended to what? The tribal areas, if Parliament makes a law to that effect. And then in 1996, Parliament made a law that is called Panchayati Extension to Scheduled Areas, Provisions Extension to Scheduled Areas, Panchayati Act 2000 or 1996. That was the case. Now, under the said act, the state governments have to formulate rules for the implementation of the provisions of the Panchayati Raj Act to these areas, right? But the tragedy is, most of the states have not implemented this, or not implemented these rules, or they have not even formulated these rules. Okay, that means most of the areas have either not been most of the tribal areas have either not been brought under the the provisions of Panchayati Raj, or the implementation is not very strong, and that is how the idea of local governance, the idea of providing local governance to the tribal communities of these states has not been properly implemented. Okay. Right. So these are the two news that we have to look into. Now let's go through a bit of background. Part 9 deals with the Panchayati Raj. Okay. Part 9 is not applicable to the scheduled areas under the 5th schedule, that is provisioned under the Article 243M, as I said. However, as I said, the Parliament can extend the provisions of the Panchayati Raj to where? These scheduled areas under the 5th schedule. Okay, under the 5th schedule. That is, parliamentary law can extend these provisions of Panchayati Raj to the areas of 5th schedule. Under the said provision, PESA 1996 was enacted by the Parliament, and Part 9 was extended. The provisions of Part 9 was extended to the scheduled areas under the 5th schedule. Okay. Panchayats and municipalities. The very important point here is panchayats and municipalities are under the state list. Okay. The other very important point from the exam perspective is the State Election Commission. If the question comes that like there are two kind of analogies that I would like to establish here. The first one is between the analogy between the Supreme Court and the High Court, because that becomes a part of our federation, right? And then I would like to establish the similar kind of analogy between the State Election Commission and the Central Election Commission. The Election Commission basically and the State Election Commission. Now, both are constitutional bodies. The provisions for both have been provided within the Constitution. Okay. So, after the 73rd Amendment Act, the provision for State Election Commission was added to the Constitution, and the Election Commission to the India was already there, present in the Constitution of India. Now, that means both bodies are constitutional bodies, that is clear. Now, if you talk about the courts, for example, because I want to establish an analogy that helps you remember things, because analogies have been proven to, because our brain works comparatively, right? So I want to establish that analogy that makes you make a comparison, and you will always remember that. Now, if you make that analogy, that Supreme Court and High Court and State Election Commission and State Election Commission, the fact is, are the high courts under the administrative control of Supreme Courts? The answer to that question is no. The high courts are not under the administrative control of Supreme Court. That is, high courts and Supreme Court both exist independently as constitutional bodies. High Court and Supreme Court are both independent constitutional bodies. However, whenever people might say that whenever a person can appeal from High Court to Supreme Court, that is because the integrated nature of our judiciary, that gives us the right to make an appeal against a decision of the High Court into the Supreme Court. That does not mean that High Court is under the Supreme Court. That is not the case. However, in the case of appointments to for the judges to the High Court, Supreme Court certainly has a lot of power. Okay. Similarly, any judgment given by Supreme Court shall be law in all of the courts, whether it is a High Court or the Sessions Court or the Civil Court, in any and every court of the India. That is not an indication of the fact that high courts are under the Supreme Court. No, that is not the case. That means now if high courts are not under the Supreme Court, how does it get established that the Supreme Court, the decisions of the Supreme Court will be binding upon all the other courts? It seems like all the other courts are under the supervision of Supreme Court, but that is not the case. The power that Supreme Court's decision will be a law for all other courts comes from the Constitution itself. The Constitution empowers the Supreme Court as a final interpreter of the Constitution, right? And if the Supreme Court becomes the final interpreter of the Constitution, then the interpretation given by that court or the highest court of the country, that is Supreme Court, will be a law for everyone, for even the courts that are high courts or that are the high courts or civil courts or district courts like Sessions Court, any court that lies below it. Okay. I hope you understood the hierarchy and the comparison. Similarly, in this election commission thing, the State Election Commission conducts elections to what? The panchayati elections and municipal elections. Okay. And the Election Commission of India conducts election to the whole of the India, that is the Parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, President and Vice President, and for the every state's legislative assembly. Every state's legislative assembly. Okay, I hope you understood that. That means the Election Commission of India conducts election to the Parliament and President and Vice President. Okay, that is the Lok Sabha election. Okay, or Rajya Sabha elections are conducted by Election Commission of India. Whereas the elections and in addition to the parliamentary elections, the elections to state assemblies are also conducted by what? The Election Commission of India. Okay. However, in every state there is a state election commission as well. It may become misleading. There might be a question that state election commission conducts elections to the assembly, and that might be a very confusing statement, right? In that case, you have to remember that state election commissions are not the bodies conducting elections to state legislative assemblies. They conduct elections to the municipalities and panchayati areas within a state. Okay. Why? Because panchayats and municipalities are under the state list in the 7th schedule. That is a very, very important point to make here, and one must remember this. I have very much stressed multiple number of times about the falling of one specific body or topic in the list, and You have to go through these lists again and again, like what should we remember? There are so many things, right? So I will make a list where you can which you can refer to in case you want for your ready reference. What you should go through while you are studying the federal structure. Federalism and federal structure are one of the very important topics from not only prelims but also mains and interview as well. Okay, because our constitution is a quasi federal constitution. Okay, it does not, it is not a watertight chamber. Okay, that state and center are having differentiated powers in a watertight chamber. It is not the case with India. Okay, India is a quasi federal state where the central government is having overriding powers over the state governments. But that does not mean states are not constitutionally independent. States are constitutionally independent and center is constitutionally independent, but the sovereign, the central sovereign, is having an overriding power over the states. But let's get back to what we are talking, and we are talking about what should we study in the lists. Okay, the first you should go through the list is the taxation powers. For example, which taxation powers, okay, taxation powers, which taxation power lies with the center, which taxation power lies with the state, and that is very important. Second one is subjects. Okay, subjects related to environment, okay, education, okay, land, okay. These are one of the most important topics that you should go through. Okay, and the third one is specific law-making powers. Specific law-making, okay, law-making powers. So this is very important. Taxation powers, which taxation power lies with which federal unit like state or center, and similarly environment, education, land, law, law and order, police, all these are recurring themes in the UPSC exam. That is why I am making it very clear that you should go through the list, and you should go through the list over and over again, right? Let's look a bit into the PESA Act. Okay, we have gone into details of Panchayat 73rd and 74th Amendment in one of our lectures. Now we will be looking into the details as to how the provisions of extension or provisional extension of Panchayati Act to scheduled areas, that is PESA Act, is going to bring the local self-governance or the third tier of governance into the scheduled areas under the 5th schedule. Now the areas under the 5th schedule are tribal areas or tribal dominated areas, or the areas where the population of the tribal community is the dominant population, right? So very importantly, most importantly, as we have been celebrating the day for indigenous people in the last week as well, it is we understand that the indigenous communities, okay, or the communities which live in the forest or the tribal communities, they have a very harmonious relationship with their natural environment. Okay, and their fundamental struggle is for jal, jungle and zameen. Okay, their fundamental struggle is for jal, jungle and zameen. They are fighting for their land, their water and their forests. Why? Because their livelihood depends upon these three. Because they are primitive or basic or agricultural communities depending very heavily for their livelihood upon jal, jungle and zameen. Okay, and that is why they have been wanting this local self-governance. Now we know that the 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts empower the Gram Sabha, okay, and as the local body as the unit of the local governance. What is the Gram Sabha? Gram Sabha is the collection of the people who are registered as voters inside voters in a village. A village can be a habitation, it can be a group of hamlets. ठीक है, तो a specific number of population should be there. So all the people who are registered in the voter list in that specific village or that specific area, panchayati area, that collection of people is called Gram Sabha. Now Gram Sabha is the fundamental unit in the Panchayati Raj, third tier of governance. Okay. Now this law, Panchayati Extension to Scheduled Act, this also makes the Gram Sabha as the nodal body, and it makes Gram Sabha very important, very nodal, very central to any kind of development or diversion of forest or diversion of land use that can take place within these areas. They will have to take permission from the Gram Sabhas. The laws enacted by state government. Now, as we see, state governments are empowered to make laws regarding the governance of these areas, right? But that power has not been accorded by the constitution. That power actually has been accorded by the PESA Act. If there's a question that about the PESA Act, and it says that, it reads like this. There's a statement in the question and it reads like this: the constitution empowers the state government to make laws for the governance of scheduled areas within the 5th schedule by provision of the provisions of Panchayati Raj. That is not a correct, that is not a permanent, that is not a completely correct statement to make. Why? Because constitution does not empower the state government. It is the PESA Act that empowers the state government to make laws for the governance of scheduled areas of the 5th schedule by the extension of the provisions of the Panchayati Raj to these areas. Okay. Now, since the enactment of this PESA 1996, the state governments have become empowered, but their laws, the laws that these state governments enact, they should not be in the violation or the contravention of the customary laws. Okay, the customary or traditional management practices of the resources of the forest, land, etc. Okay, and religious practices as well. That means the laws that the state government enacts, that should not be in the contravention to the customary religious practices, customary social practices, and management practices for the communities residing in the forests. Okay, that means their traditional the state should not intervene into their traditional social and cultural matters. Okay, now every Gram Sabha should approve the plan. Now we have read Forest Right Act FRA 2006 in at least 3 lectures and at great length. Okay, and I have always stressed that this is one of the very important legislations, not only from our UPSC point of view, but also from the real life point of view, in the sense that FRA provides rights to the tribal communities or traditional forest dwellers over their own forest resources like minor forest produce. Okay, that means, and in that act also, FRA 2006 as well, the power for the diversion of land use, power for creating, like FRA, Forest Right Act 2006, it grants power to Gram Sabha for authorization of diversion of the land use of the forest. Okay, diversion of land use of the forest mean what the forest land has traditionally been used. Now, if that purpose is being diverted, for example, for mining, for example, for infrastructure development in the forest, okay, then the approval of Gram Sabha becomes very important. And in one of our very recent lectures, we have talked about how the government has diluted certain provisions of FRA 2006, like the post clearance approval clause. Now, recently government made, what happened earlier under the Forest Right Act 2006 was that for the diversion of the land in the forest, it was very important. It was like most important for the state government to take prior acceptance or approval by the Gram Sabha. Okay, and the state government has to ensure that their rights are settled. Okay, so this prior approval clause has been now diluted, and it has become that after the approval of the project, the state government should look into the the rehabilitation of the forest communities. That is how the law has been diluted. Similarly, in PESA Act also, Gram Sabha has been made the most important nodal body for the approval of plan, programs and projects for social development, not only economic, social development before they are taken up for implementation by the panchayat at the village level, and be responsible for identification of beneficiaries. Now, identification of beneficiaries means, for example, there is a scheme called Manrega scheme, or TDPS, or targeted delivery of like food provisions, okay, under the NFSA. So in all these schemes, okay, who should be the beneficiary within a Gram Sabha? That is the purpose of that. The purpose of identification lies, or the power of identification of the beneficiary under any government scheme or under any scheme within that specified panchayati area lies with the Gram Sabha. Okay, it helps the Gram Sabha in maintaining the genuine register of the people living inside that specific panchayati area, and they can this provision helps them in maintaining that outsiders are not settling into their Gram Sabha and taking the benefits away. Okay. Now, whenever we talk about the Panchayati Raj, okay, 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts, for example, we very particularly talk about the reservations, okay, because reservations in the Panchayati Raj system are very different from the reservations in the normal governance. Let's look at it. The reservations provided for every community shall be in proportion to their population. Okay. Now, reservation provided to every community in such a scheduled area under the 5th schedule shall be in proportion to their population, right? But the point is, the reservation for scheduled tribes or the tribal people shall not be less than 50% of the total seats. That is, the reservation of scheduled tribes, however, shall not be 50% of the total seats. If there are 100 seats, then at least 50% of the seats, or 50 seats, shall be reserved for the scheduled tribe people. Now, one may argue, why this provision? The very fundamental reason behind that is the 5th schedule is the area that is predominantly dominated by the scheduled tribes. Okay, in a case where if certain provisions are not provided, the non-tribal communities might dominate the Panchayati Raj government, and the whole exercise of extending the provisions of Panchayati Raj to scheduled areas will end up in failure. Okay, that is why the reservation for scheduled tribes within these 5th schedule areas has been provided for at least 50%. It can be, if the tribal population is around 75%, then the reservation will be around 75%. Why? Because of the first clause, which says that at least 50% of the reservation provided to every community shall be in proportion to its population. So 75% population to 75% reservation. But in case the tribal population is only 40% and it is a scheduled area, still 50% of the seats will be reserved for the people from tribal communities. Okay. All the seats of chairpersons of panchayats at all levels shall be reserved for the scheduled tribes. All the seats for chairpersons at panchayat level, at every panchayat level, like Gram Sabha of course, then like village panchayat or Gram Panchayat, फिर taluk, basically block panchayat, and then Zilla Parishad. At all these levels, if the area specifically or the district specifically comes into the area of 5th schedule area, then all the seats for chairperson shall be reserved for the communities from only scheduled tribes. Okay. Okay. And as I already talked about, recommendations of the Gram Sabha of the panchayat at the appropriate level shall be mandatory for prospecting license of mining lease for minor minerals. Okay, now minor minerals and major minerals, these are also two important things. In the very beginning, I talked about the schedules. Now minor minerals, the mining of the minor minerals comes under the state list. The mining of the major minerals comes under the central list. Okay, now very important point to note here is land comes under state list. Land comes under state list. Now minerals are within the land. if the land comes under the state list, what if a major mineral is found within that land? That land will automatically belong to the central government. That is the mining license or the mining rights of the major minerals within the territorial jurisdiction of India and outside as well lies only with what? The central government. Whereas minor minerals, now major minerals like uranium, other major minerals are steel and all these things, iron, sorry. Okay, so mining for these belongs exclusively to the state government or central government, whereas minor minerals, example of minor mineral is a sand. Okay, sand is a minor mineral. So sand, for sand mining, the rights to give license for sand mining belong to state government. Okay, if there is a mining, if the state government wants to provide the mining license, if the state government wants to provide mining license to certain company or prospective license. Prospecting license means when a company is looking for minerals into certain area, that is called prospecting for mineral. Okay, and for that the mining company needs to take a license from the government. Okay, the prospecting license also the right to grant prospecting license and mining lease all belong to the state government. But the state government, if that is granting a mining license, a mining lease or prospecting license to an area that belongs to a gram sabha, which is a gram panchayat, which is under that 5th schedule area, then the gram sabha will become the nodal body for approval of such kind. Matlab gram sabha's recommendations become very important, that they should be taken into the consideration. Okay, and this is one of the major reasons why many of the states have not even implemented the PESA Act, and they have not even formulated rules under the PESA Act, because the power now they will have to face a new body of people against. They will have to face a new body of people for granting licenses for the minor minerals. Okay. Now Gram Sabha have, this is very important, Gram Sabha has the ownership of minor forest produce. Now Gram Sabha is a collective body. That means the people inside that Gram Panchayat collectively own minor forest produce. They have power to regulate the sale of intoxicants, okay, the power to prevent, and this is also provided under what? The Panchayati Raj, like what we say, the 73rd Amendment Act, it is also provided under that. Okay, the power to prevent alienation of land in scheduled areas and the power to exercise control over money lending in the scheduled areas. Okay, now this is very important because this is also related to our history. Okay, for example, the Deccan riots, okay, the DQs, you should go through that. What was the Deccan riots? What were the recommendations of the Deccan Riots Commission? How the money lenders or the outsiders, okay, took away a lot of land by putting the tribal communities in debt trap. Okay, so that is why Gram Sabhas have all these powers. Now let's look a bit about the implementation of the said act. Okay, now law has been made, but the efficacy of the outcomes of that law depend upon the implementation of that law. Okay, till now only 40% of the 40% states have not even formulated the necessary rules under the PESA Act. Okay, that means 40% states have not, like there are 10 states which have these 5th schedule areas. Only 6 states have formulated the rules under this PESA Act. 4 states, for example, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha have not even framed the rules. These are the 4 states that have not framed the rules. But now, as we saw in the very beginning of this slide, that Chhattisgarh has now formed the rules. That means now Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha are the states that have not formed the rules for extension of PESA Act under the 5th schedule. Not a single state has currently amended the Panchayati Raj Act as required under the PESA. PESA also requires that the states amend their own Panchayati Raj Acts to incorporate the provisions for what? The 5th schedule areas, but none of the states have done that. Even in the states where rules were formulated, the implementation of these rules have been very lackluster, as we saw, because once these powers have been given to the third tier of governance, the power of state government becomes limited. Okay, because this not only extends the power of Gram Sabha to determine a lot of things like customary laws, the laws regarding the customary laws and land use diversion, mining lease, prospecting lease, all these definitely happen. The extension of these laws to the scheduled areas sometimes can also cause law and order situation, and other times it can also lead to the loss of revenue to the state government. Okay, that actually that is a matter of debate how it causes. We are not getting into that, but it certainly takes away of certain powers of the state government, and that is why the state governments have been very reluctant to implement the provisions of the PESA Act. Now there is one important point: Pathal Gadi movement. Okay, Pathal Gadi movement. I will post the link of this a news article from Pathal Gadi movement in the link of in the description of this video. You should read that. Very detailed article it is, and you should read and try to understand what this Pathal Gadi movement was and how the provisions of PESA came into, like how a whole group of tribal communities started using PESA Act to defend their rights. Okay, so that is how our this lecture of PESA ends, and I hope you understood. You learned a lot of things into this, and if you have any doubts, you can connect with me in the comments section. I'll be more than happy to take these doubts. Okay. You can read these slides. There's not much into it. It only says that the PESA should be implemented in letter and spirit, and the tribal should be considered a part of conservation, because there is a conflict between the forest department, which is a conservationist, and the rights activist group or the people who are living in the forest, which claim that they have their inherent right to live in the forest because they have been traditionally living in the forest. But what should be done is that people should be considered as a very integral part. These people who are living in the forest, they have developed a very harmonious relationship with nature, and they should be considered a very integral part of the whole conservation ecosystem. Okay. And by empowering tribals by providing rehabilitation in case of displacement due to any infrastructure or mining project, and taking cognizance of the views of tribals and forest people before giving licenses for mining, etc. Okay.